afternoon. And just so everyone knows, I am currently working on a transition plan for when I am going on when I will be on maternity leave. I plan on releasing a document to the community that gives information about who to contact, what questions to ask, and a general list of resources and information and where to find that. And that should be released within the next month. I promise I will not leave you guys high and dry without anything, and I will be back. This community means a lot to me. So this afternoon, I will be talking about completing the online Social Security disability application. So this is going to be the initial application. So if you're applying for the first time, and I'm going to cover what to include in the application, what to expect, and how to answer questions. So this is going to be another very information-filled presentation, so please bear with me. And again, I'm happy to answer any and all questions at the end. So what we're going to go over is the online application itself, how to communicate with Social Security, and then general best practices. So the online application, I have included the link here to take you directly to the online application when you are ready to apply. And this is the first page you'll see. So when you're ready to start the online application, you click the link, it'll say, and then this is not the first page you'll see. It'll take you to another page with a couple of different options and some basic information. And if you're ready to start the disability application, then you click that specific link and it'll take you here. And you have to agree to the terms of service of the application, just like you do with anything else. It's very straightforward. And again, it's very important, like, you're going to have to be open and honest when you're completing this application because that benefits you. If you commit any kind of fraud, your application will be denied and you may not be able to get benefits at all. And so it's very important to be open and honest. And that's why we're going through this presentation today, so you know how to answer questions. Because Social Security sometimes asks questions in a weird way. And so you give a specific answer when it's not the answer they were looking for because they didn't ask the question the right way. So there is, because I was taking screenshots of this as I was like helping somebody complete an application a few years ago. So there was one screen that I missed, so I apologize for that. And that's the question that they ask, when did your disability start? Social Security's official name for this is your onset date. And you want to put, and so that's the date you allege your disability started. This is required for the application, and it's one of the first things you have to put into the application. It's also one of the most difficult parts of the application for a lot of people, and I get this question a lot. So what you want to consider when you're choosing the start date of your disability is you want to consider when you stopped working and when you had enough medical evidence of your condition. So with HD, you need really to be seeing a neurologist, or you need to your PCP needs to have some information, and you have to be showing symptoms and limitations of your HD. Your HD gene test is not enough. If you're seeing a therapist or a psychiatrist, that can be really helpful in terms of HD. Or if you're seeing a physical or occupational therapist, that can also be really good evidence. Social Security will tell you to put the date you stop working. That is wrong. The date you stop working is still a relevant part of this equation. You cannot apply for disability if you're still working and making more than $1,310 per month. So you do have to take that into consideration. But if you have stopped working and don't have any medical care, you have no medical evidence, and you haven't gotten a clinical diagnosis of HD, you're not going to get approved for disability. So the date that your disability starts needs to be the intersection of when you stopped working and when you have medical care. I have created a worksheet to help you figure out that date. It's on HDSA's website on the resource guide page. And this date is very important and can be the difference between getting approved or denied. When I worked with families in the past, there were families who put the onset date too soon, and their application kept getting denied and denied. And when we went to hearing, the judge ultimately said, I want to approve you, but I can't approve you based on this date because there's no medical evidence. There's no proof of your condition at this time. So let's change the date and I can approve you. I don't want you to be in that circumstance. I don't want you to have to wait 2 to 3 years to get approved for disability because the date you picked was not the best date for you. So that's really important to think about when you start the application, and you should really start thinking about the start date of your disability before you start the application. So once you've filled out that information, Social Security is going to ask you who is completing this application. So you can either apply for yourself or you can have someone helping you. I always recommend to have someone help you if you can. This application is not necessarily super difficult, but it's always good to have another set of eyes. It's good to have somebody who can be there and help you through this process, especially if you know you have difficulty completing forms, or you know you forget things, or you have difficulty concentrating for a long period of time. One nice thing about this application is you can leave the application and come back to it as necessary, so you don't have to complete this all at once. But I always recommend, especially for HD, to have someone help you complete the application. So the first thing, and the next thing, Social Security will just ask information about the applicant. So the applicant is the person who has HD. It's the person who's applying for Social Security disability. All of this information is very straightforward. Name, Social Security number, date of birth, gender, blind or low vision, and then this question's really important. During the last 14 months, has the applicant been unable to work because of illness, injury, or conditions that have lasted or expected to last at least 12 months or can be expected to result in death? HD is a condition where you should always put yes. And part of the reason for that, as you can argue, a lot of conditions will end in death, but especially with HD is because that can help trigger the compassionate allowance that you need. Or HD is a compassionate allowance condition that can help trigger it. Also, because there is, at this time, there is no cure for HD. There is nothing that can fix HD. There's nothing that's going to make somebody better. So you want to put yes for this question. If you choose yes, it'll tell you to contact the Social Security office. There's no reason to do that until after you finish the application, but you definitely want to follow up with Social Security and make sure the case has been correctly flagged for compassionate allowance once you've submitted the application. And I'll talk about that more at the end. So after you've included the applicant's information, you need to include the preparer's contact information. Again, very straightforward, the preparer's name, the relationship to the applicant. There's choices like friend, family, spouse, attorney, representative, because you can be a non-attorney representative. So there are different options. The preparer's address and the preparer's daytime phone number. So they require you to put the address in the application. Social Security will not send anything to the preparer unless you have submitted something called the Appointment of Representative Form, or SSA 1696. You can be a person's representative and not be an attorney. A friend or family can be a representative. And I highly recommend this if you don't choose to get an attorney at this point, which not everyone needs. But what it does, if you submit, so let's say my husband is the one with Huntington's disease and I'm helping him submit an application on his behalf. I could submit a 1696 that would appoint me his representative. What that does is it allows for Social Security to legally contact me and talk to me about his case. Otherwise, Social Security has absolutely no legal duty to talk to me. And so that can be really good, especially if the person you're assisting isn't always great about opening their mail, they don't live with you, they don't answer their phone. And if you want to maintain more control over the disability application process, you need to submit the 1696 form along with the application. So you have the right to talk to Social Security and they can give you information when you call. So once you've completed the general information about the applicant and the person who's helping the applicant complete the application, you'll see this page and you'll get a reentry number. You have to save this reentry number because that's how you get back into the application if you don't complete it all at once. So to return to an application, you need this reentry number and the applicant's Social Security number. That's it, but you have to make sure you save this. I always recommend copying and pasting this page into a Word document and saving the Word document. Then you can also print it out or just, it's not a bad idea to save it in multiple places. It's really easy to save and keep track of, but 100% you want to save this number. And then the other information towards the bottom, they're talking, so when you start a disability application, you get something called a protected filing date. So let's say you wanted to start an application today. Today is March 16th. Your protected filing date would be today, March 16th. Even if it takes you 2 months to complete the online application, they're still going to treat today as the day that your application was submitted for their purposes. For SSDI, that doesn't matter as much, but it makes a big difference for SSI, because for SSI applications, they start counting financial benefits from the date the application is submitted, which is why the protected filing date is so important. So even if you're not completely ready to file the application, you know you're getting close and you know SSI is going to be a factor in this individual's case, you can start the application, just get to this point and set it aside for a week or two and come back to it, and then you still have that date protected so you can get benefits as soon as possible. So one of the things that they're going to ask you in the application is employer details. This is really straightforward. They're going to say employer details for the name of applicant. Did this person work? For this year, they'll ask, did this person work in 2020? And did he or will he work for an employer in 2021? So did they work last year? Will they work this year? Yes or no? And the reason they're asking that question is because really what they want to find information about is total earnings. And so they're going to ask you to calculate total earnings for the last year somebody worked. So for this application, it was 2019. And well, in this case, this particular individual hadn't actually worked since 2017. And so that's what brought up this question, because I had to answer no. So did this person work for an employer in 2019? No. Did they work for an employer in 2020? No. So if you haven't worked in a few years, then it'll bring up this question. If this person neither worked in the last 2 years, when was the last year they worked? You get a drop-down menu and you can click the last year they worked, or you would click this person has never worked. If this person has never worked, then it creates issues with this application, because there are certain people. This application is really for supplemental or for SSDI, because only certain people can complete an SSI application online. If you've ever been married, you can't complete the SSI application online. I don't know why they have that random qualification, but that's the thing. So if you have never worked, you don't really want to be completing this online application because it's not going to help you. I like to talk about direct deposit, because if you have a direct deposit account, and almost every, like a lot of people do, you want to put that information in the application, because it means you could get your benefits sooner. Because what I have seen a lot in my career is one day someone will be like, Allison, how come I just have thousands of dollars in my account now? Oh, you probably have been approved for disability. They haven't told you, but they gave you all your money. That's happened so many times. And so you will get paid faster if your direct deposit is already set up. It will take longer to get everything figured out if you still have to set up your direct deposit, or if you need, Social Security doesn't send out paper checks anymore. What they do is they send out a debit card, but you still have to go through a process to get that set up. So if you have direct deposit, please go ahead and put that information in the application. So Social Security does ask general information about supplemental security income in this application. They want to know if you intend to apply for SSI. They also want to know if you've submitted any prior applications, which that's fine. If you've submitted prior applications, that is not a big deal. That does not preclude you from continuing the application process. Social Security just wants to know that information. And part of the reason they want to know if you want to apply for SSI, because again, some people will be able once they're done with this application, can go complete another online SSI application. Some people will have to schedule a phone call with Social Security. And so how you answer this question triggers Social Security's response to your personal application process, because everyone's different. So if you've never married and you're eligible for SSI, you can complete the online application. But if you've been married in the past, you're going to have to complete the SSI application over the phone with Social Security. So you just want to make sure you answer these questions honestly. Again, with SSI, if you have more than $2,000 in resources as an individual or $3,000 in resources as a married couple, you are not going to get approved for SSI. So there's no reason to apply for it. If you do have less than that amount, then go ahead and check yes. So just, there's never a harm in applying for SSI, because you can still get benefits. Like even if your SSDI benefit is going to be more than what you would get in SSI, you could still possibly get SSI while you're waiting for SSDI benefits to start. So if you fall under the resource requirements, definitely click yes and go ahead and apply for SSI. If you don't meet the resource requirements, there's really no reason to take your time and answer all the financial questions, because you're going to get denied anyway. Next, Social Security asks about workers' compensation and public disability. And this is really important. You need to be open and honest here. So workers' compensation and public disability counts as a separate criteria, because Social Security wants to know if you're getting other federal benefits. I have never actually represented somebody who is getting workers' compensation, so I've never had to answer yes, but generally what happens is, because workers' compensation comes out of another federal program, it could reduce your SSDI benefit until you're done receiving workers' comp. But Social Security needs to know this information, or you could get in huge trouble for like quote unquote double dipping. It could mess up your Social Security disability if you're not honest. So be really, really honest when answering these questions. And then Social Security also wants to know if you're receiving any more money from your employer, just because they want to know. They want to make sure that they're counting the money as the right thing. You can 100% continue to receive money from your employer as long as you're not actively working. They don't count sick pay, vacation pay, or other time against you if you stopped working. You can continue to receive those benefits and apply for Social Security disability. If you expect to receive money from your employer in the future, like you expect more, like there might be a lump sum payment you're expecting for work you did in the past, or you're going to get more sick pay or vacation time or something. Social Security just wants to know that, so they know like, okay, they're going to get $5,000 in the future. It's not because they're working. It's because it's money from their employer owes them for another reason. Like they're using up their sick time, they're using up their vacation pay, and that's 100% okay. Social Security just wants to know that that money's coming. It is not work earnings. It is something separate, because Social Security is really just looking at work earnings. That's how they decide if you're eligible, that's one of the ways they decide if you're eligible for disability or not. And getting sick pay does not count towards the $1,310 per month substantial gainful activity, because it was not gainful activity because you weren't actively working. It was just a benefit from your employer. So that's important to answer these questions honestly. If you know you're going to get money, but you're not sure how much you're going to get, it's okay to give an estimate and say, this is my best guess. Social Security is fine with that. You don't have to be exact, so don't stress out about being exact. So also going to ask if you have dependents. And the reason they ask this question is because it could impact how much money your family could receive based on if you are approved. So if you have a parent who receives more than 1/2 of support from you, they could get an additional financial benefit if you are found disabled. Also, if you have children under the age of 18 or 19 that are still in school, they could get additional benefits as well. And so they want to have this information. So if you get approved for disability, they can go ahead and flag it and make sure those payments go through, or they complete like that application process to make sure either your parent or your children or your spouse gets these benefits if you're approved for disability. Looking through this, I did skip the marriage question, so I apologize. I didn't include that in this presentation. You will be asked if you've ever been married. You will have to provide your spouse's and your ex-spouse's information. They want to know if you've been married for more than 10 years. They ask for your spouse's or ex-spouse's name, date of birth, social security number. They ask for your date of marriage. They ask where you were married. They ask if you are divorced, when you got divorced, and where you got divorced. And for children, they ask how many children you have, and they ask to provide their names, but you don't have to provide their social security number. So once you've done all of that, you'll come to the remarks section. It's really, 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 really important that you use this section. Do not leave it blank, because that is a missed opportunity for you if you use this section blank. As you can see, there's a sample remarks section already in here, and I recommend that everyone writes something similar to this, like because it's giving a guideline to Social Security. I should be found disabled because I meet listing 11.17 as I have adult onset Huntington's disease. You want to use adult onset Huntington's disease because that's how Social Security refers to it. It's also good if you have space to give a little descriptor about what HD is. And because Social Security doesn't have it's their job to know about these conditions, but there's thousands of different conditions. Huntington's disease is very rare. It's not something they come across very often. A claim examiner may only see it once or twice in their entire career. So to give yourself the best chance of getting approved, you do want to provide information about what HD is. Two examples: HD is a progressive degenerative neurocognitive condition, or HD is like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and ALS combined. If you have space in the remarks section, because unfortunately space is limited, you only get 750 characters, which isn't very much. You may have to edit it down a few times. But you want to put that information in there. You also want to make sure you request compassionate allowance, because Social Security does miss that fairly often. If you are requesting it and asking for it, it's triggering Social Security to be like, okay, does this meet the criteria for compassionate allowance? Do we have to flag this compassionate allowance? And it's kind of giving them notice. It's putting them on notice. And that's why I also think it's important, because Social Security has a specific listing for adult onset Huntington's disease, which is listing 11.17, to also point that out to them. I have been doing this a long time, and I have seen Social Security analyze clients' claims under the wrong listing. I don't know how I haven't had a brain aneurysm yet from how angry that makes me. But like, you want to control for that. I always say you're trying to give Social Security a roadmap so they understand how to analyze your claim and what they're looking for. Because I know I've said this many, many times. I think I've said this in other webinars, and I will continue to say this many, many times. When you submit a Social Security disability claim, the burden of proof for the claim is on you. It's not on Social Security. It is your burden to show that you have HD and that your HD is the reason you're disabled. And so making this roadmap for Social Security is really helpful for you and for them, because you want to make sure they're following the roadmap and they're hitting all the checkpoints that they're supposed to. And that's why using these remark sections are really important, because it helps you create this roadmap. And if we go back, it also gives you a place to talk about symptoms and limitations. Any time you have an opportunity to talk about your symptoms and limitations as a result of your HD in the application, you need to do so. Okay, so once you finish this remarks section, what will happen is you'll go and you'll see the whole overview of the application that you just worked on. And then you'll come to this screen that asks if you want to submit the application. So here's this screen, some general information. I can go back to it. But the Social Security disability application is actually made up of two separate applications: the application for disability insurance benefits, which we just went through, and the adult disability report. So once you get to this screen right here, it indicates that you have completed the application for DIB, or disability insurance benefits, and you are ready to move on to the adult disability report. Selecting Submit and Continue does not mean you are done with the entire application. You will still have the opportunity to include all relevant medical information and conditions because we haven't gotten there yet. So what will happen is Social Security will send you a summary of the application for DIB that you just completed, which you'll need to sign and send back. And just as a heads up, if you have a Social Security office that is appropriately staffed for the population in your area, they may work a lot faster than other offices. And if you haven't finished the adult disability report within 2 to 7 days, they may call you and be like, how come you haven't submitted the other half of the application? Tell them you're working on it. Don't feel rushed into completing it. Don't let them force you into completing the application over the phone. Take your time. They can calm down. This is your application, not theirs. Don't let them pressure you into anything. It'll be okay. They're trying to finish they're trying to do their job. Don't let them stress you out. You have time. Like technically, the online application is supposed to stay open for something like 3 to 6 months. I hope it doesn't take you that long to complete the application, but you have time, so don't let Social Security pressure you into finishing the application. If you've just had a busy week, you haven't had time to work on it, do it on your time. This is your application, this is your case, you have control of this situation, and don't let Social Security force you into anything, okay? Also, don't be afraid to submit the first half of the application. It's okay. The first half of the application is honestly the easier part because it's pretty straightforward information. It's just general information about you, the preparer, marriage, work. For the first half of the application, because this particular person hadn't worked in a few years, I didn't have that box pop up. If you've worked in the past 2 years, they will ask for the name of your employer, the address of your employer, and I think they'll ask how many days of you worked a week and how many hours. So you will need to have the address of and maybe the phone number of your most recent employer, but just for your most recent employer. Okay, so now, sorry, I forgot the name of it. Now this is the adult disability report, half of the application. So the first thing they're going to ask you is if you have a third-party contact. A third-party contact really should be a friend or family member. It should not be a doctor, and it should not be a social worker. And unless you absolutely know no one, you really should include somebody in the application because Social Security may send a form for this person to complete. So it should be somebody that you trust. It should be somebody that knows you're applying for disability. It definitely needs to be somebody who knows you have HD, and it should be somebody you see fairly regularly. So if Social Security asks some questions about your HD, they can answer honestly and know information about you, how your HD is impacting you, and what's going on in your life. And they'll just ask for the person's name, their phone number, and their address. The next thing they will ask is if you've been seen by a doctor or other healthcare professional or received treatment at a hospital or clinic. And honestly, for HD, you could answer yes to both physical and mental conditions because HD meets both of those criteria. Also, I'm gonna go into this a little bit more later. If you have more than one diagnosis and you're receiving treatment for more than one condition, let's say most of the treatment for your HD has been mental so far, but you also have chronic back pain, then you've clearly been receiving treatment for a physical condition and a mental condition, so you would check yes to both. This application is not just about your HD. Which brings me to the next section, your conditions. I'm making the movement look at my eyes like I'm watching you right now, just so everybody knows, because when you complete the disability application, if you have more conditions that are disabling or that impact you aside from HD, you need to list all of those conditions in this section. So if HD is the condition that's primary disabling for you, that should be your first condition. So in the first condition box, you would write adult onset Huntington's disease. Let's say you also suffer from depression, high blood pressure, back pain, and GERD. You need to list those in conditions 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that means you need to have 5 conditions total listed on this sheet, because Social Security has to look at the combination of your impairments. Including other conditions does not take away the severity of your HD, but your other conditions could cause additional disabling limitations. And all of that's important, because Social Security they have certain criteria they look for if you have physical limitations, and certain criteria they look for if you have cognitive or mental limitations. So let's say your HD causes mostly mental limitations, like your HD and depression causes mostly mental limitations, but it doesn't cause a lot of physical limitations, but your chronic pain does. Then that means you're hitting all of the boxes in both of Social Security's criteria conditions categories, and that helps you. All that does is it helps you, because you're just trying to show that you have multiple conditions that have impacted your ability to work. And you don't necessarily have to pinpoint what condition causes what limitation. Sometimes you can't tell. That's not what's important to Social Security. They really just want to see that your conditions cause symptoms and limitations that now interfere with your ability to work. You do also need to know your height and your weight. And you can, again, best guess is fine. And do your conditions cause you pain or other symptoms? Check yes if it's yes, check no if it's no. I feel for a lot of people that box should be checked yes. Again, it's based on your personal, like everybody's different, everybody's case is different, so there's no one right answer. There's no one right answer for everybody, because HD impacts everyone differently. So again, this is about how your HD impacts you. This is about how your conditions, whatever they may be, impact you. Just so remember to be open and honest. And now that you know that you can include other conditions in the application, that's something to think about and prepare ahead of time, so you know how to talk about all of that information. And just to reiterate, list all of your medical conditions. Only including HD means you could leave out other important conditions that impact your ability to work. And again, Social Security has to look at the combination of your impairments, so all of your conditions are relevant. So once you list your conditions, the next thing Social Security is going to ask is about doctors and other healthcare professionals. What's important to note here is only list standalone physicians or healthcare professionals in this section. Do not list individual doctors if they are part of the same healthcare system. You will have a chance to list the entire healthcare system later. The reason this matters is a healthcare system generally has one medical record processing facility, and Social Security is only going to send the medical record request to the processing facility. Under no circumstances do they ever send medical record requests to your actual doctor. That's never. They send it to the medical record processing facility. So if your doctors are have standalone clinic, if your doctors are standalone physicians with their own private practice, then you would list every doctor who has their own private practice. But if they're all under an umbrella, like if all of your doctors are at Duke, or if all of your doctors are at Ohio State, or if your doctors are part of Kaiser Permanente, then you would just list that healthcare system. Otherwise, list out individual doctors. I don't want you to do more work than you actually have to. If you don't have to list all your doctors individually, don't do that. The only exception is if you want Social Security to request records directly from a Center of Excellence social worker or partner site social worker. For some reason, there are some centers of excellence that Social Security just cannot find. And don't ask me why. I have unkind things to say about Social Security, so I'm not going to say them. But in my experience, I know there's been issues with Columbia, because the Center of Excellence at Columbia is also partnered with the New York Psychiatric Institute. And so they always send the medical record request to the New York Psychiatric Institute, but that doesn't pull up anything. And so in that case, I always recommend having put the Center of Excellence itself and the social worker after speaking with her first to make sure that's okay. Like, hey, can I list you specifically? So then Social Security can send it to her. She gets the records to the right place. I've also seen that be an issue with Rutgers in the past. And I know those can't be the only two. There might be a few others that have weird issues like that, but it's important to know that and to use the resources that you have. 100% talk to your social workers first before you start the process. Like, how do you guys get medical records? A lot of times now they have to go through the medical record department, so then you just want to use the hospital system or in the application. But for the most part, most centers of excellence, most neurologists are within like practice systems, so you wouldn't list them individually. The only time that there's an exception, if the doctor really does have a private practice or the physical therapist has a private practice, or you know you need to use the social worker's direct contact information to make sure the records are received. And in my experience, I've never had an issue with Johns Hopkins getting records from Johns Hopkins. That you would just put in the Johns Hopkins Medical Record Department facility and they would get everything from central processing. But when you're putting in the information, so this is what just individual doctors or healthcare professional details look like. You need the name of the doctor and then the office or clinic name if applicable. Like, let's say your doctor works, because usually like your doctor may work at an office that may not have their name, like it may be a small practice that has a few doctors in it, but if it's a standalone, you'd put your doctor's name and then like the name of their office. Then you would put their address. You need to make sure the address is correct and the phone number. If you have your patient ID number, that can be really helpful because then Social Security will include that in the medical record request, which makes it a lot easier for the medical record department to find your information. And then you want to put your treatment dates, your first visit, your last visit, and your next visit. Treatment dates are really, really important because this tells Social Security what dates they need to ask for when they collect records. Provide your best guess for first appointment date if it has been a few years. If you don't remember, like month and year is fine. Again, best guess, because Social Security will use that best guess as a starting point to get as many records as possible. Utilize your patient portal to get accurate dates for recent and upcoming appointments. If you cannot get the exact date, then include the month and the year. Most facilities offer patient portals now, so this is a resource you should be using and you should get this information in advance because you want to make sure Social Security has all of your important appointment dates. It's also really important to include any upcoming appointments, especially if they're scheduled within the next 2 months of when you complete the application, because Social Security will likely be able to obtain that information. So one thing that comes up is, let's say you want to complete the application now, but you know you're not going to have your neuropsychiatric evaluation done for 2 months. That's okay. It could take Social Security 2 months to get to the point where when they're even ready to request medical records. So if they know that's something that's happening and that they need to look out for and that they need to request, they can request it when they get to the point of processing your application where they actually request medical records, because they don't request medical records right off the bat. Everything starts at the field office where they only look at the technical criteria. So they look to make sure you're working below SGA, that you have enough work credits, or you meet SSI's financial criteria. Once that has been determined and you pass those bars, your case will get sent to Disability Determination Services. And once it gets sent to Disability Determination Services, that's when you're assigned a claims examiner. And it's not until you have a claims examiner that Social Security sends out medical record requests. So you do have time. You're also going to need to include tests ordered by the doctor. So this is something that can be harder to keep track. Like, I know all the tests now because I've read hundreds of pages, thousands of pages of medical records, and I'm familiar with them. You may have questions about it, so it's okay to ask your social worker, like, hey, what tests have been done for my HD? Or what tests have been done for like whatever condition? And they should be able to help you figure that out. Social Security also wants to see the medicines recommended or prescribed by the doctor, the medical conditions treated by the doctor, and the treatment from the doctor. So for medical conditions, Include all conditions that are treated by the physician or care provider. Also include HD symptoms that are being treated by the medical provider. So if you're talking about your neurologist, you want to say you have chorea, like for example, you could say you have chorea, balance, and coordination issues secondary to HD. Or you have memory loss, difficulty concentrating, depression, and anxiety secondary to HD. Because you're indicating that you're being treated for your HD, but also you're giving specific symptoms and limitations that you're experiencing because of your HD. Again, anytime you have an opportunity to include symptoms and limitations, include that information in the application. And you're doing this because you want to make it very clear to Social Security what information they need to get from every medical provider. And then as far as treatment from doctor, you do not have to include what happens at every appointment. You can just use a summarization or overview. Like what I used to say is examinations, medical testing, and treatment plans, or examinations, physical therapy, and treatment plans, or counseling, therapy, and medication management. So you change the wording a little bit depending on who you're seeing. Like if you're seeing a physical or occupational therapist, it would be good to say physical therapy. If you're seeing a psychiatrist or a psychologist, then saying counseling, therapy, and medication management. Like you don't have to go into extreme detail. You can, but like treatment from a doctor is usually pretty standardized. And so it's more important to include more detail about like the medical conditions you're being treated for than necessarily the treatment itself. So medical tests. What does it look like when you add a medical test in the application? So most HD relevant tests are not included on the drop-down list for the application. So you're going to need to select other. You're then going to need to describe what this other test is, the body part that's being tested, and the date of the test. Like the things that are included on the drop-down list are something like ultrasound, X-ray, blood test, which you would choose blood test for gene test. It's not a huge list of options. Like throughout my career, most of the time I've had to select other and then add information. So some examples of standard Huntington's disease tests are the Unified Huntington's Disease Rating Scale, or the UHDRS, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, the Mini Mental Status Exam, neuropsychiatric testing, Tonetti mobility testing, PT or OT evaluation, and the barium swallow test. None of these are included in the drop-down menu. All of these are relevant to an HD disability claim and things that are often done in clinic. And these are things you do want to put on the application, especially things like neuropsychiatric testing, PTOT evaluation, and things like that. The MoCA test, or the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, can be a really good test, but it can get complicated because certain facilities, certain medical facilities, that's the word I'm looking for. Every medical provider has a different set of rules for what can be included in their medical records. So some facilities won't put your actual MoCA assessment in your medical records. They just put the number that you got on the test, whatever out of 30. That's not super helpful to Social Security. That's meaningless to Social Security. They only want to see the MoCA if your whole test is actually in your medical records. So that's something you can ask about. That's not necessarily your responsibility, but let's say you've had multiple MoCA assessments. Your facility, for whatever reason, says that can't be in your patient record file, so Social Security can't see the actual paper result. If that's the case, you'll likely be sent to a consultative exam. It's no big deal. Social Security just wants to do their own cognitive assessment since they couldn't get enough information from your doctor or your medical record facility, which is no fault of your own, no fault of your doctor. Just every hospital system has different rules and regulations and works differently. And that's something you can talk to your social worker about. It can be helpful just to know so you have a better sense of what you may have to do throughout the application process. And so for medical tests, once you input the information, this is what you'll see at the end. So it'll be a complete list of all the tests that you've undergone. And so you can verify the information is correct. But also, of these, mini mental status exam, I had to put in polysomnogram, I had to put in X-ray as a choice that shows up, MOCA is something I had to put in, and the patient health questionnaire for depression is something I had to add in separately. And so for some of these, it can be hard for like, I always say for the MOCA mini mental status exam, brain or cognition. The Unified Huntington's Disease Rating Scale is the entire body. A lot of times neuropsychiatric evaluation is also the entire body because they're trying to get a whole overview of you. So it's okay to just put body or cognition or brain. And this is just something I always had to check. I always had to make sure I spelled brain instead of Brian, because that can be a really easy mistake when you're doing an online application, and I literally second guess myself every time. So that's why it can also be helpful to have somebody else reviewing the application with you in case you make, just silly mistakes. It happens. We all do it. So that was just individual doctors or healthcare providers. Now we've moved on to hospitals and clinics. Everything looks the same. They're asking for the same information, but again, this is for a hospital or clinic system, not just an individual doctor. So if you're getting treatment at Duke, you would click add. Again, just the difference between healthcare system versus an individual provider. So when you click add, this is what pops up. It looks very, very similar to an individual doctor. You'll have the name of the hospital or clinic, and then you have a space to include the name of the healthcare professional who treated you. You don't get a lot of space to do this, so you may just want to include the last names of your physicians. If you only have 2 physicians, you can include first and last name. But if you have like 4 or 5 physicians, you may only have enough room to include last names, and not everyone may fit. So put the most important people first. Like put your main neurologist first, put like the main treatment providers first. And then if there's not enough room, you could always add that under the treatment section, or like the treatment provided or medical conditions treated. Like you do have some space to add that information. Again, very important to have the correct address and phone number. I'm not saying you have to do this, but what I had started doing when I was directly representing families is I put the medical record department information in there instead of my healthcare professional, especially if it's part of the clinic system, because you want them to send the medical records to the right medical record department. Treatment dates at the hospital clinic work a little differently because there's 3 different sections. They ask if you've been to the emergency room, if you've had any inpatient stays, and if you've had any outpatient stays. For emergency rooms, they'll ask for your last 3 emergency room visits. For inpatient stay, they'll ask when the stay started and when you were discharged. And then for outpatient, so let's say you're just going for a regular HD checkup, that would be an outpatient visit. So you'd list your first outpatient visit, last outpatient visit, and next scheduled. And if you don't have anything scheduled, I always put continuing care or ongoing care in that box, because sometimes you don't have another appointment scheduled because you're not going to see that doctor again. If you know you're going to see them again and you just don't have an appointment scheduled, definitely in that, like saying that ongoing care or continuing care, let Social Security know that you are going to have another appointment, you just don't know when it's going to be. And this time I'm going to focus on medicines. So if you have medicines that's prescribed by the doctor, this looks the same under the healthcare professional or the hospital clinic. It'll give you room to add 3 medicines. If you have more medicines prescribed by that individual or that hospital clinic, you'll have room to add more medicines later, and then the reason you're taking the medication. You want to make sure you spell the name of the medicine correctly. You can use Google to verify the spelling. I used Google to verify the spelling of every single medication I ever put into an application. And you want to make sure the reason for taking the medication matches a symptom, limitation, or condition for the doctor, medical provider, or hospital clinic that prescribed the medication. And you can see this here. I covered up the prescribed, recommended by doctor because that's confidential information. But so you can see this person was prescribed Wellbutrin. It was for their depression and anxiety. So the depression and anxiety needs to match with the doctor who's treating them for depression and anxiety. and so on and so forth. And so again, like you get a chance to review all the medications, the reason you're taking them, and who they're prescribed by. So if you're taking medications for your Huntington's disease, let's say you're on Austedo, then you would, name of medicine would be Austedo, reason either either Huntington's disease or chorea secondary to Huntington disease, and then prescribed by the doctor. So it should be prescribed by your neurologist. So that's the information you'd want to see on this page. So once you're finished putting in all of your medical information, and that's usually what takes the most amount of time, there's a lot of information that has to go into that section because you have to list all your doctors, you need to make sure their addresses and phone numbers are correct, you have to get your dates of treatment correct, you have to list your tests and your medicines. So like that can take a lot of time and that requires a lot of information. And so that's probably the section you're going to spend the most time on. That's okay. That is the section you want to spend the most time on because that's really important. Social Security cannot approve you for disability if you don't include all your doctors, if you don't include the right doctors and the right information, because they won't know to get medical information. They won't know where to send your medical record requests if you don't do a good job putting in that information. So always take your time, always list all of your doctors. The only time I say a doctor may not be relevant is if like your gynecologist. For women, I don't know if there's an equivalent really for men, but for women, if you only see your gynecologist once a year for your standard appointment and there's nothing wrong and they have like they're not providing any real treatment or anything, you just go because you kind of have to, and they have no knowledge about your HD or any other disabling condition, then you don't necessarily need to include your gynecologist. I did have an experience one time where it was actually the individual's gynecologist who knew about this person's family history and started seeing cognitive decline in the patient and was the one who recommended she go see a neurologist. So in that case, that's the exception. But otherwise, you want to include all your doctors, include your primary care physician, include your neurologist, include your social worker, include your therapist, include your occupational therapist, your physical therapist, include whoever treats you for depression, include who's ever treating, like if you have GERD, you need to include your gastroenterologist. Essentially, you need to include all your doctors. So that's why it can take, if you have multiple doctors, it can definitely take time to complete that section, and that's okay. It's better to take your time and do it right and include all the information you need to include than skip something that could end up being really important, because unless you've read every single page of your medical records from every single one of your doctors, you don't know who has relevant information that you could be missing out on. So once you've the medical portion, you're going to need more work questions. So Social Security will ask about work status. So Social Security needs to consider your work experience and job skills. So you're going to have to answer questions about when your condition began to impact your ability to work. So they ask, are you currently working? This one's pretty clear. No has never worked. No has stopped working. Yes is currently working. And again, you can be currently working and apply for disability as long as you're making less than substantial gainful activity. And if you click yes, you are currently working, a box will pop up to provide more information that you're only working part-time or you can only do so much work a week because of your condition. And you want to make sure you provide those details and you provide as much information as possible. So after work status is work activity. Social Security needs to know why you stopped work and whether you made any changes as a result of your condition. So when did you stop working? This can be a guess if you don't exactly remember, but be as close to the date you stopped working as possible. Why did you stop working? Because of your condition and other reasons, because of other reasons. If you choose because of condition and other reasons or because of other reasons, a box will pop up to give more information. And that happens. Like, honestly, we can take 2020, for example. There are a lot of people who stopped working because they were laid off because of the coronavirus. But you may have been laid off, but then your HD progressed. So you stopped working because of other reasons, but during that time you were laid off, you realized your HD had progressed. And so that is what you put in that box. Like, I was laid off due to the coronavirus, but while out of work, I started noticing these issues and I realized I couldn't return to work because of these issues. And then the next question, does your condition cause you to make changes in work activity before you stop working? This is really important. So if you're given any accommodations from work, check yes. If you went from full-time to part-time because of your HD, check yes. Like, if you were given any special treatment at all, or made any kind of conditions to your work environment, any kind of changes to your work environment, you need to check yes, and then list everything that was different. Accommodations are really important to Social Security. Remember, you're trying to show that you can no longer work because of your HD. Accommodations that you were given to accommodate your symptoms and limitations from HD is really relevant information to Social Security, so you need to make sure they have that information. When it comes to disability and when it comes to this application, I say there's no such thing as providing too much information. Social Security needs to know all of it because they're not going to see you in person. They're judging you based on a piece of paper. They're judging you based on what's in this application and what your medical records say. If you don't give them the full story, they're not going to judge you accurately. And after work history, they're going to ask for your job history. So they're going to require you list your most recent 5 jobs in your past 15 years in this section. So they'll ask first, since the date you listed as the start date of your disability. Again, this is an older application, so the SGA is outdated, but this year they'll ask, have you had gross earnings greater than $1,310 in any month? The answer should be no. If it's yes, there are exceptions, but hopefully the answer is no. And then you need to list how many jobs you've had in the last 15 years. If you've only had 1 job in the last 15 years, then you only have to complete 1 job. If you've had 5 jobs in the last 15 years, then you have to complete information for all 5 jobs. So you select the number that you've had, and then they'll ask you this information. They'll ask job title, type of business. I always like to include type of business and the name of the business that you worked. You have to include month and year for start date and end date. Again, if you don't remember, use your best guess. And then there'll be another remark section at the end of this section. You can put in the remark section, the dates, my start dates and end dates for this job were an estimate. Social Security is okay with that. You just can't leave it blank. How many hours per day you worked, how many days per week you worked, and your rate of pay. The frequency drop box includes weekly, monthly, and yearly. So if you had a salary, you could put in your salary, or hourly. If you got paid hourly, you can put in your hourly rate. So there's different options. And yes, you may not have worked the same amount every week, depending on your job. Again, estimate, use your best guess. It's okay. After work, Social Security will ask you about education training. They'll ask for highest grade completed. Have you completed any type of special job training? And they'll ask if you've been in special education. So for highest grade completed, it goes like if you didn't finish college, but you finished 1 or 2 years of college or whatever, like that's an option. If you have a college degree, a graduate degree, a professional degree, and then whatever other grade level, the date you completed it. Again, if you don't remember the exact date, you can just choose a year. If you have completed a type of special job training or vocational school, then you need to include the type of program that you completed and when it was completed. And this includes things like technical college, if you have any special trainings or certifications, all of that you want to include. If you have a commercial driver's license, that counts because you do have to go through special training for that. And for like this didn't come up so much for HD, but I also represented individuals who had something called pulmonary hypertension. Pulmonary hypertension is automatically a disease that disqualifies you from having a professional, like, was it Class C or Class D driver's license? Like, you can't drive a semi, you can't drive a school bus. And so that's relevant information to Social Security, because if you can no longer be certified in your one job, the only job you've ever had experience in, that kind of precludes you from working. So that's why all this information is relevant. You may not feel it's relevant, but Social Security uses all this information. They look at a lot of complex things. So if Social Security is asking for it and you have that information, or you've done something in that kind of program or education or whatever, it needs to be in the application. And then special education, when did you attend special education classes, the school name, the location, the dates attended, and did you have special education at more than one school? And I don't like special education because it's kind of vague, but if you ever had an IEP or if you had accommodations at school, I would include that here too, because that is still relevant information to Social Security. And then after all of this, you'll get to one more final remarks section. This one has 2,000 characters, so more than twice as much space than in the first section. And again, you want to fill up all of it. You want to put in as much information as possible. You want to reiterate that you meet listing 11.17 because you have Huntington's disease. If you have any other conditions that have a Social Security listing, include that. Things that I would commonly see with HD would also be depression and anxiety. They both have listings. If you want to know about other listings and other conditions, Social Security has their blue book. There's a lot of different listings and criteria. I know I've talked about that a little bit. You can go through that and see if you meet any of those criteria for anything else, because you want to put that in your roadmap. Again, giving a little bit of background information about what HD is. Here, the sentence was expanded to say that HD is a neurocognitive degenerative disorder that impacts my ability to walk, talk, and reason. Any little additional pieces of information you can give about HD helps with the application process, because it trigger to Social Security that HD is no joke. It's a very serious condition and they need to take it seriously. You know it needs to be taken seriously. They don't. This is about you educating them and advocating for yourself. You want to list your symptoms and limitations. If you have a whole list of symptoms, you want to include it. You want to include examples of your symptoms impact you. So for this individual, they have loss. And so that they are forgetting their vocational skills that they've been using for years as an automotive technician, and they can't learn new material. Like, it's really important to not just say, these are my symptoms. You also need to say, these are my symptoms. These are the limitations they've caused. This is how it interfered with my ability to work, because again, you're trying to paint this picture for security. I always give the analogy, you guys may have heard me say this before, but you want to paint a picture. Would you rather submit the Mona Lisa or a stick figure drawing? It's okay if you're in between. It's okay if it's Monet or a Degas or, Seurat, dots worked. The point is, you're trying to create a clear image. The more information you give, the clearer the image is going to be, and the better the chances that Social Security is going to understand your application, understand what you're going through, and be able to find you disabled. There are always extenuating circumstances. You could submit an amazing application, have really supportive medical evidence, and still get denied because Social Security can be difficult. But I want you to put your best foot forward, and being this detailed and specific is putting your best foot forward and giving you your best chance. So now that you've completed the application, so what will happen from this point? There's a few other things that I didn't include that are pretty minor. So once you get to the remarks section, it'll ask if you'll again get to review everything. So you'll get to see all the information you put in, your conditions, your doctors, your medicine, your tests, the remarks, your work history. You'll get to review all of it just on one screen, which is really nice. When you're ready, you'll hit submit application. Well, once you hit the submit application button, the next thing that's going to pop up is, if you're doing this for somebody else, Is the applicant with you? Can you electronically sign a medical release document? You have to sign a medical release document so Social Security can request your records. Go ahead and electronically sign it. That'll also expedite the process. Once you electronically sign it, your application will be submitted. On the next page, Social Security will ask if you want to save a copy of your application. Please save a copy of the application. We have no idea what you submitted if you don't. You can't go back. You can't share that information with an attorney. You can't share that information with anybody else if you don't save a copy of the application. Please, please save a copy of the application. The other reason for that is if you get denied and have to appeal, you have a lot of the information already, so you don't have to go find all of it again. Like, I don't want you to have to go collect all of your doctor's information all over again if you already have it. It's a good resource for you to have, so please save a copy of the application. Another option you'll have is to print a cover page. Please print the cover page. And why you want to do that is because if you have evidence, if you have medical records, if you have letters from your doctor, if you have letters from friends and family, it will tell you if you have the 1696 you need to submit, it'll tell you where to send it, and it'll include check boxes for what information is included in your packet. Never send the originals, always send copies. So you always have a copy in case Social Security needs you to send it again, but mail everything to Social Security once you've submitted the application, and then you're going to follow up. So communicating with Social Security. Once you submit the application, wait 3 to 7 days to follow up with them. Call and say, hey, I submitted this application. Did you get it? Have you processed it for compassionate allowance? Just want to make sure you have everything. Also, it's triggering Social Security that they need to do what they're supposed to do. And I always say follow up regularly because they're not going to follow up with you. I would follow up at least once a month. If you submitted a 1696 and you're trying to make sure that's on file, you may have to follow up more often initially because it can be a pain in the butt to make sure that gets into the system. But otherwise, follow up about once a month. When you're communicating with Social Security, first, if they call you, always answer questions honestly with lots of detail. Again, I don't think you can provide too much information. Do not be afraid to advocate for yourself. This is so important. You need to follow up regularly. If the person you're speaking with is saying that Huntington's disease does not qualify as a compassionate allowance condition, and they are not listening to you, ask to speak to a supervisor. Ask to speak to a supervisor because that is your right. Do not be afraid to ask that in that circumstance because likely the person you're talking to has absolutely, unless they're your case manager, they have nothing to do with your case. They can't hurt your case. They can see what's going on in the system, but if it's not assigned to them, they can't do any work on it. So ask to speak to a supervisor. A lot of times the people who are answering the phones at the office are not the people who are actually working on your case. The person who's working on your case would have a phone number, which usually you can't get unless you've done a phone application with them where they reach out to you directly. But if the person on the phone is misinformed or unhelpful, don't be afraid to ask for a supervisor. Or don't be afraid to ask for a supervisor if you're not getting adequate updates about your case or information is missing. Don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. This is your case. This is your life. This is your disability at stake. Don't be afraid to fight for yourself. Do not be afraid of Social Security. There are some really angry, grumpy people who work there. It happens. It happens in all fields. But that doesn't mean there aren't other people in the office who are incredibly helpful. So it's okay to ask to talk to those people. And then general best practices. Do not undermine your symptoms and limitations. Do not make it seem like you're better than you are. When you complete the disability application, it needs to be from the perspective of a bad day. It needs to be about the can'ts or the need help with or the things that have changed, not the things that you can do. That sends the wrong message. Ask for help if you need help. This is not something that should be completed alone. Ask questions if you have questions. This is not an easy process. Ask your doctor, ask your social worker, ask me, ask Social Security. Work with your doctors and social workers throughout this process, keep them informed, and you should tell your doctor and social worker that you're going to apply for disability before you apply, because they're an essential part of this process. If you could get a letter from them and you haven't, missed opportunity. If you could have gotten important information from the social worker that would have helped your case and you didn't, missed opportunity. I don't want that to happen. They are some of your biggest advocates as well. And most of the time, like, if your doctor doesn't agree with your disability application, that's a different issue. But most of the time, they're supportive of your application and they want to help in whatever way they can. Don't take away that option because you didn't talk to them. Talk to them. They're part of your care team. They're an important part of your care team and they need to be part of this process. Track all of your doctor's appointments and contact information in a journal or a spreadsheet, or make sure you get business cards so you have the correct up-to-date information. And it's really easy to find the contact information for our medical record department online. Keep an up-to-date list of your medications and why you take them. And if you experience any side effects are very relevant to Social Security. Again, continue to follow Security once you've submitted your application. Confirm the application has been received. If you submit the 1696 appointment of representative form, confirm that's been received. Confirm that your case has been correctly flagged for compassionate allowance. Confirm when the application is sent from the field office to Disability Determination Services, because that's a different phone number, that's a different follow-up, that's them needing different information. Confirm Social Security gets your medical records, especially the HD records, if that's the main condition that is disabling. You want to be an active part of this process. The more involved you are in this process, the better your odds are of making sure Social Security understands what's going on. They get all the information they need to make the decision, and the better yours are getting approved for disability. Are there any questions? Here's my contact information.
Thank you, Allison. That was a really fantastic presentation. I do want to remind folks that Allison's presentation will be available on HDSA's YouTube channel in about a week. You'll be able to review all of this information during that broadcast. You can also send additional questions to Allison through the HDSA website by going to the Ask Allison page and just putting in your questions then. We do have one or two questions that I think you can address. The first one is a question about what happens if you move to a different state in the middle of treatment.
That's not a deal, then you just include abilities in both states. Social Security is really focused you've gotten in the last 5 years. So if you've had multiple doctors, let's say you've moved 3 times and been to 3 different neurologists in the last 5, then you include all of those neurologists, because you're all, especially with HD, you're trying to show the progression of your symptoms. And so all of those doctors' notes would be relevant. Even if you weren't super symptomatic 5 years ago, that really helps tell the story of how you're symptomatic now.
Thank you. Well, that concludes our broadcast for today. We want to thank Allison for this very informative presentation. And we invite you to join us again in the fall when Allison rejoins us for Disability Chat. Until then, take care and have a great day.